Exciting.
Everyone. I'm Donna. I'm with Charles Bridge Publishing, and I am joined here by our publisher, Yolanda Scott, and author Molly Beth Griffin. We have a few people still trickling in, so I'm just going to wait a few seconds to minutes to let people trickle in. But thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for coming to the PRH Book and Author Festival. This has been great. I hope you're enjoying it. We're going to get started here in a minute. It looks like we have a consensus. Oh, wait, there's one more. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, you're going to find a button called Chat, and that will open your chat box. Please feel free to make any questions or comments in there. And if you have anything you have burning questions for, please let us know. We'll get to you as soon as possible. If you are on camera, it would be great to take yourself off camera. Thank you. And this will be recorded, and we'll have it live in or we'll have the recording in our booth later today, as well as on our website. So if you do need to duck out. We will have questions and answers at the end of this, but like I said, if you do need to ask a burning question, please do. I'm going to throw it over to Yolanda and Molly and excuse myself here, but please have fun.
Sounds good. So Molly, you want me to just start right in with our overview of the book?
Yes, that would be
awesome.
Great.
Can you see the cover now? Just
yes.
Checking. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to treat you all to what we do for our sales reps every time we have to present a new list, and we do what's called a launch presentation. So I wanted to just start this off by giving you the pitch for what I think is a really special book, 10 Beautiful Things, and I'm so excited to get to talk about it in more depth with all of you. So without further ado, let me tell you about this book. In 10 Beautiful Things, the main character, Lily, is sad and nervous about the changes in her life, which include moving to Iowa with her grandmother. And so, let me figure out how to scroll here. So to pass the time during the very long road trip to Lily's new home, Graham suggests that they look for 10 beautiful things along the way. At first, Lily sees nothing beautiful in the April slush and cloudy sky, but as Lily begins to process her fears, she comes to see beauty in the everyday world around her. And the 10th beautiful thing that she finds is Lily and Graham's relationship itself in the new home that they're making together. So the story deals with the universal themes of loss and transition. Lily's reason for moving in with Graham is not specified, which leaves room for a lot of interpretation. The book encourages developing observational skills and fosters a love of nature. The beautiful writing emphasizes mindfulness, gratitude, and a growth mindset, topics we're seeing trending as part of social emotional learning programs and pandemic living. It's well suited for parents, relatives, foster families, teachers, guidance counselors, nonprofits, government agencies, anybody that's looking for books that would help kids navigate loss and change. So that is 10 Beautiful Things in a nutshell. And now what we wanted to do, Molly and I, was to talk about 10 questions about 10 Beautiful Things, the book. So my first question, oh, did you want to say something, Molly? Want to jump in? Oh, she's muted.
Yes.
Donna, you got to unmute her. The controlling mute is there, and we're not allowed to unmute.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Good.
I'm not in charge of my own mute button, which is fine. I can give up control. It's okay.
So are you ready for me to jump in with question one?
Yeah, I am. So we set this up as 10 questions about 10 beautiful things. So we'll just ask each other some questions.
Sounds good.
If people have other questions, they can chime in too.
Yes, please. I'm keeping the chat open so I can keep an eye on that. Okay. Well, question number one is, what was the inspiration for this book?
Well, it was a road trip story at first. It wasn't a move at all. It was just about a family. There were siblings and a mother, and they were all on a road trip to see the sandhill crane migration in Nebraska. And that is obviously not where it ended up, but it was always about learning to love a new place. And so that is kind of was the heart of it from the beginning, was getting used to a new place and learning to see the beauty in a place that's maybe not very beautiful to you at first. So that has stayed the same throughout, and that is where the inspiration started, was on that road trip, and many road trips through that area of the country.
Well, that leads nicely, I suppose, into question number 2, which is, how long does it take to write a picture book, from idea to published books? What was the road trip for this book for you?
This book was a very, very long road trip. So this book took almost 12 years from original idea to final published, released book. And that is quite long for a picture book, but every picture book is super different. So I have some that have been more like 4 years, which is maybe more normal, but there really isn't a normal for picture books. So this one went through a lot of big changes. It used to be very, very long. For a while there was a crane migration story kind of parallel to the child story. And then that got separated off into another book, and, you know, went through a lot of things. So it started in 2009 and came out in January of 2021. So, you know, and there were some delays in there too, which we'll talk about, and other kinds of changes, but definitely a bumpy road trip for this one. But I think, you know, it all worked out in the end. So yeah, that leads to my question about submissions for you, Yolanda. In the middle of this long, weird process, it went out on submission and it got rejected by a bunch of people, and then it landed on your desk. And I wanted to ask you why you chose it out of all of the bazillion submissions that you get. Uh-oh, you're muted. Donna, she's muted again. Oh no. Donna, can you unmute Yolanda, please? I'm texting her. Unmute Yolanda. There we go.
Okay,
now
great. All right, so we're gonna leave this unmuted here. All right. So do you mind repeating the question, Molly?
Yeah, so what made you choose this book out of all of your submissions that you get?
So I think it's a really good question, because as you and I have talked about before, this is what would fall under the category of a quiet book, which a lot of times authors and agents look at as possibly the kiss of death for a book, right? Like, you don't want to have a quiet book, because for some reason quiet gets equated with low sales or not interesting. And I think in some ways there's like a germ of truth in that sometimes editors use the phrase when they are declining projects to say, oh, this book is too quiet for me, when what they really mean is that it's boring or not engaging the reader in the way that they're looking for. So I think that quiet gets used as a euphemism for something else. But in and of itself, I think we can all see many wonderfully successful quiet books out in the marketplace. A lot of times these kinds of word poems tend to win Caldecots and things like that. So there's clearly an interest for a book that is a little more lyrical and maybe explores an inner world in the way that this book does. So for me, that actually is what really was compelling about this book, was its very quietness. I think quiet, it's just about making sure that you have enough sales outlets for something like that. And so that's a conversation that we did have quite explicitly in the publishing house before I made the offer to your agent. And I may have shared one of these emails with you, but I'm not sure all of them yet. So I had emailed our head of sales and marketing to say, what do you think about this book? It's definitely a quiet book, but what do you think? And she wrote back, it does have the potential to be quiet, but the text is beautiful and the message is strong and universal. If we can make it giftable and retail friendly with the art choices, I think it's got a lot of potential. So I'd love to give our team the opportunity to sell this. I vote to acquire it. So I loved that feedback, and I really made a mental note about what she said about the art program and was looking for something that really could be very accessible and giftable and retail friendly. And I think we really found that with Maribel. And then, you know, my response at the time was, I said, I know this is a quiet book. The thing is, the writing is excellent. I'm rarely so impressed with an author's writing. I reviewed other manuscripts of Molly's. I think this is an investment in an author that would be a good long-term fit for us. And that's important too. Like, we don't just publish books, right? We publish authors. So I was looking for somebody that we could build a longer-term relationship with. You don't want to just be thinking one and done, right? So there was that. But then, and I'm sorry I'm long-winded here, but I was on mute, so I had it all built up, right? But, I think that, you know, the other things that I saw in the manuscript, though, was that there had so many different hooks to it. So it had loss, it had a child in transition of some kind. I loved the observational skills that the book was fostering. I loved that the emphasis on nature and on slowing down, and I could see that the mindfulness practice that was kind of built into the story, the growth mindset, you know, trying to shift your mood by focusing on the positive, gratitude. It just was all there, and I felt like that was a really good message. Little did I know how much that was going to strike a chord in 2021. So sometimes there's a serendipitous element to publishing too. Anyway, all right, I think we need to get Molly unmuted. Oh, yeah. Good, she is.
Well, I muted myself because I have my windows open and now they're like working on my screens. So will you tell me if that's really loud, and I will.
Yeah,
I will
hear
it.
And likewise, if my children barge in on me, well, I'll just be patient.
Yeah, they all might. Anything is possible. Well, that I do want to talk about the art, but first, I want to talk about the editorial process that followed that acquisition, and ask you how the editorial process shaped this book in particular, and in general, what you think your role is as an editor when you're making a book.
Right. Well, it might be easier for me to answer the second part, actually, because like my role as the editor is to help you find your voice and tell the story that you want to tell, and remove, I often describe it as like removing the obstacles from your path, right? So that you can get where you want to go. So the first thing that is important to me is to maybe ask questions and try to understand where you or any author is coming from and why you wrote the book, so that then I can help see where the text is meeting those goals and maybe where it needs a little help. So that's generally where I would start philosophically. The next place that I tend to start is with structure. And because for me, it's like the bones of a book have to be in place in order for there to be a actual manuscript that functions. In your case, the structure was good. I didn't feel that there was any work we needed to do on that. The things that we focused on, and you can speak to this too, was the age of the character and the point of view. So do you want to, because you had struggled with that before.
It was so interesting because in the long, bumpy journey, this book got rejected a lot of times for being quiet and also for being too sophisticated for a picture book. And that I actually was advised to make it into a middle grade novel more than once. And I just didn't want to write it as a middle grade novel. I wanted it to have the visuals. I wanted it to be a tool for younger kids and their parents. So I really wanted it to be picture book ready. And so when you accepted it and then said, why don't you write it in third person? It was in first person, and that was part of the sophistication issue, was the child was having thoughts, articulating thoughts that a child that age really probably wouldn't be able to articulate. So just by moving the narrator outside of the child, we were able to change that to make her seem younger and feel younger and sound younger, so that it could still be a picture book age child. And she got younger throughout the process, which is sort of funny. So I think that that's a great example of an editorial process change that just opened it up You know, it wasn't a criticism. It was a, here's what you've been hearing and here's a possible fix. And I was so relieved because, you know, it's an easy fix, you know, and that changed everything. So
how did you feel like when you first tried that switch? Like, did you think it was going to be a good switch to put it in the third person? And then once you tried it, how did you feel about it? Like before you sent it back to me?
I was so glad to have an idea for how to do it that I was I didn't resist it. Like I think sometimes you would, especially if somebody tells you to do that to a novel. It's like, oh my God, that's a big overwhelming thing. But it was a relief. And then it just sort of fell into place at that point. So I think that was a big editorial change. And then the other piece was cutting text throughout. And that just happened from the beginning to the end, right? We were cutting text just constantly.
Up until the very last bit. I feel like there was one, like, was it when the picture I showed where she's in the seatbelt and I just feel like we kept taking.
The last thing that came out was her 9 fingers, her showing 9 fingers. And I was like, she's showing 9 fingers in the art, so we don't need to say that. There were lots of things that once they were in the art, they didn't need to be in the text anymore. And that's just natural and easy.
It is. It's just part of the evolution of a book, right? And I think it's really a really hard thing for writers because they're trying to sell a text without any illustrations. And so like by nature, you kind of have to put a little bit more in it, knowing that it's going to come out when the second piece of the book comes in, when the visuals come in. Sorry, I'm going off script now.
That's okay. We can go off script.
But I'm curious from your perspective, like how much you're thinking of that when you write a manuscript to send in. Like,
it depends on the story, honestly, because some need more. This is such a heavy on visual description, and it always was, just because of the nature of the story. And because I wanted the place to come across really clearly, which ended up, this will lead into talking about Maribel, because I wanted the illustrator, no matter where they were, to get it right with the art. So I think that this one, it had a lot more of that, where there was a lot of text that was maybe describing things that were going to be visual later, and other stories are more action-based or more dialogue-based, but this one had quite a bit of that. And I think some people put those things in notes to the illustrator, and I kind of hate that. So, and then I feel like I'm micromanaging. So I put it into the text. I put it in as beautifully as I can, and then you just have to hold it loosely, I think, because you have to know that it might come out, and that's for the best, I think.
And that there is that interplay, right? Like, so maybe you had a phrase, like the reason why Maribel illustrated the 9 fingers is because you put it in the text, and so she did it, and then you didn't need it. So there's a back and forth that goes on.
Yeah. I mean, I think people think that all the editing happens to the text, and then the art happens. But really, it's like the text gets edited, and then the art happens, and then the text gets edited again, and then the art gets edited, and then, you know, and there's a lot more back and forth, I think.
Yep.
So let's talk about the illustrator. Why did you choose this illustrator for the book, and what was the process of working with her like?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because I know originally you and I had talked about maybe trying to get a Midwestern illustrator, because we were like, we really want a strong sense of place, or maybe, I mean, I definitely thought it if we didn't talk about it, and I was looking at that, and we ended up getting an illustrator from Spain, so about as far from a Midwestern illustrator as there could be, right? It was, so it wasn't the most logical choice, seemingly. But what I think I love about Maribel's work is that she really has a rich emotional world of the child that I think, to me, really matched what we were trying to do with the text too. And I felt like that would be a good match for it. One of the things we do in editorial and design, when the designer gets assigned to a book, we work so closely. We're just like a team of 2 that work on the book. And we sit down and we talk about what we do a little agreement called the VTA, which is our visual trait agreement, where we come up with a couple of words or phrases that we think are really important for the book. When it could be something like, in the case of this book, I would say heartfelt, like tinged with loneliness, like there's a moodiness to it perhaps, and contemplative, like certain words like that might come up. And so those would be the words that the designer then starts thinking about when they're selecting typeface, when they're selecting the illustrator, when they're designing the book, the palette, the color palette, like all those things. So Maribel fit really nicely into that. We had an additional challenge with this book is that somewhere toward the end of the book's process, the designer left the company, so then we had another designer pick it up, which definitely happens sometimes. And fortunately, we all work closely enough that we're a relatively small company, so everybody knows each other's books, and it was a pretty seamless transition. But then that's always something, it's a relationship that's with the illustrator that's now not there, and so we're trying to pick that up again as well. So that was a little bit about the process of working with her. The other thing was, because the language barriers are not a problem at all. Her English was great, and we emailed most of the time anyway. Any kind of, like, it's actually, we work with international artists all the time, so there's no trouble with the technology or the time zones or any of that stuff. It's all worked out very well. Yes, you have to build in a little bit of extra time to send them proofs so they can review their work, but you know, FedEx works internationally. Oh, here comes my son. He's like, what's going on in here? Talking about children's books. He's like, he's in prime picture book age too. So, you know, I think the main difference is just a cultural one, right? Like, you know, what kind of car was she going to pick? She did kind of that European license plate look with the long numbers, you know, so we had to kind of mush that out. Sometimes, not in Maribel's case, but we certainly have had like different cultural norms, like wine glasses all over the table at, if it's a French illustrator or something, and we have to think about whether it's appropriate for the American audience, or that kind of thing. But
not that we never have wine glasses.
I know, right? It's like we have wine, but we're not allowed to put it in our children's books. But in this case, it was a pretty seamless process. Honestly, I didn't feel that the international connection did anything but enhance the appeal of the book.
Well, and she did a lot of research, I think, is part of that. Like,
she did too, and we sent some, and like, you know, certain things like what does the rain look like on a Midwestern plain? It was something she was not familiar with, so she had to look it up. And those sheets of rain are like amazing to see, and I think she did a great job with that.
Bless the internet! You can just Google image search pretty much anything.
Oh, and car seats. We did have a lot about the car seats, right? Because it was like figuring out what age Lily was, what kind of a car seat she'd have been, and like what the seat belt, whether it was a 5-point harness. And like, then we were even asking, like, I wonder what her weight is, because, you know, above 50 pounds, it's supposed to be this. She's got to be safe in Graham's car.
Yeah, for sure. And what ended up being your favorite spread in the book?
Well, the one I just mentioned, I think, which was
rain.
The sheets of rain. Let me share and go back to that one.
So you can see.
You can share my favorite. Just happens to be here. That one. I think it's so beautiful, and I think because of where it is in the story, it's this wonderful metaphor for all of the like dangerous emotions and big emotions that we have. And so it was just the breaking of this was a real turning point for Lily.
I'm just gonna shut my windows really quick so that noise stops. So like 2 seconds.
Go for it. I'll talk about the rain, the sheets of it. It's a hard book to pick a favorite spread from because it's just beautiful, beautiful art. But I definitely love this one as one of the double spreads. And then I think my other favorite one is when there's two, like when she's smelling the mud. I just think that's such a beautiful moment of mindfulness. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. Well, I actually have, I was going to show you because I'm right here at my desk. I have a little peg doll image of her smelling the mud.
Oh my gosh, who made that?
So a friend of mine has an Etsy shop called Peg and Plum.
Oh,
and
that's so
she does
cute.
custom work, and so now I have little Lily smelling the mud right here on my desk.
So cool.
So yeah, I love that one too. And Under the Umbrella is another favorite. But those big spreads are beautiful. That sunrise picture is so gorgeous. I love her color and her big sweeping scenes. So, I mean, it's hard to pick one. I also love the barn, and we went back and forth on the barn because I wanted it to be really skeletal and the falling apart.
Yeah, I forgot I had the actual book. It was Digital Age. I'm losing track. Let me show that, because it was such a great moment too in like challenging what is the idea of beautiful. So here's the picture of the barn, and here's Lily in the car, and the text says, Lily woke up when Graham tapped her knee and pointed out a falling apart barn. That's not pretty, Lily said. That can't count. We're not looking for pretty. We want beautiful, Graham said. So it stood halfway to 10. I just love that concept, right? Oh.
Yeah, and those barns are so dramatic and cool, and that the tree she put next to it too was beautiful. So I love those moments too. Thank you. I'm glad you got the book out. I have some copies. So I wanted to ask, unless we have chat questions that are related to that. Number 9. How'd you find your team, editor, illustrator, publisher? Okay, well, we can do some of these at the end too. But yes, that whole team is so important. And I'm glad you talked about the designers, because the fonts are so beautiful, and how the cover's embossed. Is that what it's called?
And people can
like
see.
shiny?
Yep. So the cover is embossed, so it's raised up and it's shiny, which is pretty cool. And the font that was chosen is what's called a distressed font. Let me see if we can even see it. So it's partly torn apart. You know, this looks worn in the way that that barn is, for example.
Right. So how did the pandemic affect the publishing plan for this book?
Yeah, so a really unprecedented time in the world, and then how it hit publishing initially is like when it first happened, we had no idea what was going to happen and how this was going to unfold and impact our businesses. And now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that actually publishing has done pretty darn well out of this, because I think people have rediscovered a love of books with not much else to do. Although it does vary from publisher to publisher depending on which markets you're most dependent on. And so like a good chunk of our business, for example, is school and library, and schools and libraries were shut down for a long time. So there wasn't that. But then there was increased opportunity in the bookstores, and with the parents looking for so many curriculum related topics to be able to help support their kids at home learning. So we kind of picked up where we lost, we then picked up in other places. So that was across the board. But like initially, we really had to actually think about mundane things like the warehouse capacity. So suddenly, if the books are not moving out of the warehouse, and we work through Penguin Random House, which has the ginormous, state, one of the best, probably the best warehouse system in the world. And if the titles aren't moving out as quickly as you are normally anticipating, but they're coming in at the same rate, then you're gonna get a big backlog. And so one of the things we had to do was to release some titles a little bit early, even to just start moving them out. And then the next thing we had to think about was our fall list, and what were we going to do, because originally 10 Beautiful Things was going to come out last fall. And for those who don't know, the publishing cycle is so early. Like we were making decisions absolutely about that last March. We had to be thinking about what was going to be going out in September, October. And ultimately, we were just really skittish about what the market was going to be like then, because all the bookstores were closed down at that time. Schools and libraries were closed down. And I felt like it was going to be really hard for fall titles to stand out if you were somebody new or a new type of book. And that did actually turn out to be true, that what did very well last year were tried and true books and series and names. People wanted the familiar, and it was a lot harder to break out for new books. So we made the very difficult decision to postpone to January. And boy, I'm really glad we did, because I just think at that point, enough of the pandemic had affected people's lives in a way that they were like really eager for a book just like this. So to me, this idea of managing transition and loss, and looking for nature for comfort, for finding ways to be grateful. Like all of those things just ended up hitting a nerve. So for me, it ended up actually being great for this book. How did you feel from the author perspective? Because nobody wants to hear that their book's postponed.
Oh, I know.
You were waiting for how many years? 16?
So many years, and then to have it delayed again. And like you said, that decision was made like late March, early April, and everything was so scary and sudden. And but then I'm so glad that by the time it came out, we knew how to do Zoom events, and we knew how to, you know, and people were shopping for books again, and you know, people were sharing. I mean, we put stuff on Seesaw and whatever, you know, like there was just all these different ways of getting it out there. And yeah, like you said, people were just sort of desperate for this kind of acknowledgement of hard things, and sort of a way to move forward from there. Yeah. So I think it was a perfect time, middle of the winter, and, you know, month, whatever, 11 of lockdown, was this really wonderful moment for it to come out. And now we're moving into spring, and it's in people's homes, and they're like, oh, we can do this. So that's really fun. And I'm going to be able to do some like story strolls in the spring and that kind of outdoor events, like a farmer's market. And so I think that'll be fun now that it's been out for a couple months. I think the timing has actually worked out really well. I'm trying to tell my summer self that it will be okay because it did work out for sure.
Well, we've kind of strayed into the territory of the next question a little bit, of like just noting that like the book has hit a nerve. It actually got 4-star reviews, which I love. And I think like the question that comes to my mind really is like, how are you seeing this? So we've talked about how it hits a nerve, maybe for parents or for anybody who's like hearing about the book, but on a very practical level, like how can educators use this story in their classroom or library?
So I think it's been really important that schools have embraced SEL learning and specific lessons. So my daughter gets them once a week on Fridays, and we do these breathing exercises and we do these stretching exercises, and you know, we talk about what zone of feelings we're in and all of that. And it's just been very the schools, the teachers and counselors and school psychologists and all of them are really stepping up to this huge challenge of how do you cope with an entire population of children that are stressed out and exhausted and sad and grieving and all of that. And they need and want books to help them teach those lessons. And so I think this has been a really good one for that, because it can lead you into conversations with kids about, you know, what's hard in your life right now and what changes have you had to go through and how does that make you feel and what does it feel like in your body, and then what can we do, you know, what sorts of strategies do we have for coping when that's happening. And so they do things in the book that you can do in real life, like breathing and like looking for beautiful things and small normal things that might help you get through those hard things. So I think it just is naturally something you can use for those sorts of lessons, and that's gone really well. And I know we were going to put we have an activity guide with all that that's going to go in the chat. That is free and has things like a maze and a word search and whatever, but also some discussion questions and stuff for helping you use the book with kids.
Excellent. So yeah, well, let's make sure that gets in the chat. Another question, we're up to question number 9 already here. Ooh. Is, closing in. The reader doesn't know actually why Lily is moving in with Graham. And did you ever consider making that explicit, and why did you decide to do it the way you did?
Well, for sure, people ask all the time, and when the advice was to move it into novel form, that was definitely kind of where that was headed, was like, why is she in this situation, and how is she gonna, get through this? But I really wanted it to be more universal than that, and something that any kid could see themselves in, because we all, whether we've moved that way or not, or had our families change majorly or not, everybody deals with transition, and everybody deals with change, and that's hard for everyone. So I wanted a book that could apply to any of those kind of situations. And it's been really interesting to hear from readers who have seen themselves in it in various ways. People who have had to move or live with someone else, or whatever. A reader said her dad was in rehab, and so she had to live with her grandparents for a while. And so there are just all kinds of reasons why a family would look unconventional or have to change living situations that we maybe don't even think of unless it's our story. So I think it's been really good to leave it open, so that it can be used in any of those. I signed a book to a kid who is in a foster family, and he's going to be moving from one foster family to another. And that just was like, of course, but I hadn't thought of that, because there are all of these reasons why people have to be uprooted and deal with change. And right now we all are, every day, everything changes every day. So that kind of loss is just part of everyday life right now, I think. My daughter has a different teacher next week because of some kids going back in person. And so she's dealing with, nothing changes for her, but she has to lose this teacher that she's very attached to right now. Yeah. So, and that's like a small thing, but it's big to her in this situation. And I think we all have those stories right now.
I think, the challenge of writing a book that's open-ended, because I've read a lot of submissions that have that open-ended quality, and a lot of them, why they don't work is that the omission becomes distracting, so that the reader is sitting there reading going like, what happened to her parents? Or like, oh my gosh, what's going on? I hope I find out by the end. And then if you don't, you feel kind of disappointed. For me, I hope we've avoided that feeling, because that's not what the story is about. The story is not about what happened to her parents or her living situation. The story is about going through change and how you can build resilience through that process, So I think that's maybe why it works. Let's hope. We'll have to leave it to the readers.
And people can be curious without it keeping them from enjoying the other.
It can be intriguing. And I think it also makes for a great discussion at the end. But what do you think happened to Lily's family? Why is she living with Graham? Yep. So here we are at the last question, and we can open up to chat. But what were the most beautiful things about the process of making the book, or what's been really surprising or beautiful for you to hear from readers now that the book is out? You touched on that a little bit. But.
Yeah. And this is a fun question, because the obvious answer is always seeing the art. For those of us who don't make our own art, it only lives in our heads for years and years, and then somebody else makes this world real, which is so cool. But actually what I wanted to show you, and I actually didn't practice screen sharing, but we'll see if I can get, is when people send me.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Did that show up?
Yep, we can see the picture.
Okay, so this was on Facebook after my launch party of a grandma going out with her granddaughter to look for beautiful things, and they found the reflection of branches in the meltwater. And I just thought, this is why we go through the 12 years right here, to see that. And that's so fun. So I love, especially now where I can't be like in a room with a bunch of kids doing this, it's fun for me to see what parents and grandparents and teachers, I have one more to share with you. So I get sometimes like tagged on Instagram when teachers do these things with kids. So this is kid art of 10 beautiful things, and they're 10 beautiful things, and kid drawings of what they think is beautiful. So that's fun. Of course, some kids draw their iPads and stuff, which is fine. But and
maybe they'll end up being designers for tech companies.
And music, and I think that's fireworks, but I'm not totally sure. So it's really fun for me to get to see, how it affects kids out in the world, and parents and caregivers of all kinds, especially grandparents who are taking care of their kids, and aunts and uncles who are taking care of their nieces.
It's just, I just love how simple the activity is of just looking down. You could sit in a room and look around for 10 beautiful things. You can go for a walk in nature. You could be on a road trip. You could be having a walk through New York City. You could, anywhere you can stop and look at the world around you and find beauty. And I think that's
and especially really when a lot of us aren't traveling, and we aren't doing big dramatic things out in the world. But boy, are we taking a walk around the neighborhood several times a day, or, doing extra yard work. So we can definitely do this, just in our own little spaces. And that's been wonderful to see. Do you have an answer to this question?
It was basically just similar to yours. I was lucky enough to get to do it with my own kids, both, and we took pictures, so we had like a montage of 10 little pictures out at there's a nature preserve nearby that we did, but we also just did it on a road trip, like I was saying, and you can look at road signs along the way and find 10 beautiful things. It's just like, it's the adaptability, I guess, of that exercise that I love. And I guess like in the process of making the book, I think what's been the most beautiful and surprising about it is the reception. It's a quiet book. It's like up there at the top of our list for sales right now. It's amazing. Like, that's so great to see. And it's a nice validation, I guess, that something that high quality, that's introspective and quiet, actually can be a commercial success. So I like that too.
Yeah, that's fun for sure. Yeah. Donna, do you want to be in charge of questions from the chat? I haven't really been paying attention, sorry.
It's not a lot so far, but we can certainly open it up now. If people have any questions about the book or writing or editing, working in a publishing house. You teach writing, Molly, so this was...
I do. I teach picture book writing through the Loft, and on my own I critique a lot of manuscripts. How I connected with the publisher is through my agent. My agent knows Yolanda from way back
in the day. Yep.
So that was a great connection.
Now, you don't have to have an agent. A lot of publishers are only open to agented, but not all publishers. And Charles Bridge is open to unagented as well. So it's not a requirement, but it can certainly facilitate things.
This is my first sale with my agent. So I have sold other books without an agent too. And small presses are a great way to do that as well.
Here comes Donna.
Hi, you guys.
Hi, Donna.
Just jumping in. If there are any questions, please do let us know in the chat, and we'll be glad to answer anything. I do want to let you know, or remind you, those of you came in later, there is a digital galley available of 10 beautiful things in our booth today. there is a discussion guide that we talked about that is downloadable on our website. If you go to charlesbridge.com/PRH, you're going to find everything that's available in our booth today, including a link to all the downloadables on our site. Be sure to enter our giveaway for our spring list, which includes 10 beautiful things. And we're giving away copies of those. So please let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, we're going to end this chat. And I want to thank Molly so much for joining us today. And thank you, Yolanda. This was a wonderful conversation. This book is amazing.
Ooh, we just got a good question in the chat, though.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think, like, along with quiet books, sometimes poetry books or poetry collections are also, like, falsely seen as a tough sell. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Molly?
So my poetry is chapbook form for adults, and so those are on my website, mollybethgriffin.com. But I think all picture books are poetry, first off. I'm going to say that. It's a great blend of fiction and poetry. You get to care about language and line breaks and, page turns and all of that. But I actually just sold a book of poetry for kids to the Minnesota Historical Society Press. It is called Rings of Heartwood, Poems on Growing, and it's about how plants and animals grow. So there's a poem for each of, I think it's 12 different animals and plants, and that will be a 2023 spring. I'm hoping for spring because it's kind of springy. Book with Claudia McGeehee doing art.
Oh, I love
that. So, yeah, her art is so stunning. So that's my first poetry for kids.
And hopefully not your last.
Book. It was fun to do, but it's also hard. So it's got poems and then nonfiction sidebars, which nonfiction is super new for me. So that was challenging. I'm not a great researcher, but I'm very obsessed with how animals grow. So that one will be the first that's actually poetry, but I like to think that all good picture books are poetry. They're meant to be read aloud, just like poetry, and they're, interested in how words sound and how language works and all of that. So,
rhythm and pacing and all of that.
For sure. I actually used to teach a whole class called the Lyrical Picture Book about picture book poetry. And I'm semi-obsessed with that idea. So good question. Thank you. Are there other things in there?
You've got some poetry lovers. Thank you.
Yes. It is. I mean, it's really they're not separate. They shouldn't be separate.
Exactly.
I don't understand that. So
exactly. Well, thank you again, and thank everyone for joining us at the PRH Spring Book and Author Festival. Enjoy. There's more coming all day long, so have fun. And this is being recorded, so if you didn't see the beginning, come back later. It'll be archived on SLJ site, and it will be on our website later today. So take care. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.